Hey, today we're talking about your freezer and what you can freeze. Now, most of the people I've talked with lately are looking for ways to save money, but one of the easiest ways you can save money is by utilizing your freezer and doing it correctly. So that's what we're getting into today. So the first thing you need to know about your freezer is that certain things freeze really well and certain things don't. Certain things do not translate. So let's first talk about the things that freeze really well. So the first question you may have is, how do we freeze stuff so that it won't go bad or be a soggy mess in the freezer? So I put together a whole food freezing guide for you, and it talks about how certain foods will freeze. So yes, no, maybe, and then also how to go about freezing foods. So the first thing you need to know is some foods will freeze just fine, others will not. There's a difference between using foods that are frozen in and as an ingredient in your dish and having it be the main event. If you want some type of fruit or vegetable to be the main event, then make sure it's not frozen. The only exception I find is with potatoes. Potatoes freeze really well, however, they require blanching. Blanching is just a special term, meaning you're going to par cook it in boiling water for a couple minutes and then put it into an ice bath or ice water where it's going to stop the cooking really quickly. So I did an experiment last year where I bought 50 pounds of potatoes to see if it would be easier for me to freeze them compared to try to buy organic potatoes at the grocery store, already frozen. So what I found was it actually takes a long time to blanch things. And since we have to use and work in batches when we're doing something like 50 pounds of potatoes, we're not gonna do all 50 pounds at the same time, right? It does take some time. So that's something good to know as well. Some food does not freeze well, no matter what you do to it. So some examples of that are squash. Do not even think about freezing zucchini. It's not going to translate. If you want to preserve zucchini, I would find a friend who has a freeze dryer. I have not tried dried zucchini. I think if you diced it really finely, you could put it in something like a soup. But I don't know, it just does not translate well. So make all that zucchini bread while you can. I don't think that it's going to translate well to the freezer. What are some other things that don't freeze well? Well, while I was doing research on this, I found that they said that spinach does not freeze well. But here's the thing. While we can get it from the store, I wouldn't try freezing it yourself because they can flash freeze things on an industrial scale that we can't do here at home. So think about all of your lettuces, all of your fresh lettuce, the things from the garden, romaine, radicchio, anything like that, that's not gonna freeze well. Cucumber, not gonna freeze well. Celery, the jury is out, because here's the thing. I do freeze celery. I dice it up super fine, and I know that that's going in a soup. So I really don't worry about it. If you are gonna use fresh celery for something in a recipe, like for chicken salad or something like that, don't use the frozen celery. Like I said, I only use it for soups and stews and that sort of thing. Tomatoes are a big question mark because if you ask experts, they say not to freeze tomatoes because they become soggy. But here's the deal. If you have frozen tomatoes, you can put those right in a slow cooker or an Instant Pot on slow cook mode, and you can use those to make tomato sauce. It's actually perfect because once you freeze the tomatoes, the skin will come off right away. You don't have to worry about that. So you're just slow cooking your tomatoes and you're gonna make your tomato sauce with that. Again, we're not assuming this is fresh. You cannot make a caprese or something with a frozen tomato. It's just not the same. Most of the time you're going to be freezing a couple categories of food: fruits and vegetables, meats, dairy, and carbs like pastries and carbs like pie crust and things like that freeze extraordinarily well. The one thing I do have to say is don't forget that it's in your freezer. I do this all the time. Meats, again, freeze extraordinarily well. This is where a vacuum sealer comes in so that you make sure you do not end up with freezer burn on your meat, because that's no bueno. Cheeses. I've heard that dairy is not a problem, and then I've heard that dairy is a problem. Here's my golden rule in terms of freezing dairy. I should probably use it not as its sole ingredient, but as an ingredient in something else. I'll give you an example. So cream cheese does get a little weird when you freeze it, but if I'm using it in a cheesecake, then it doesn't matter. It's going to turn out just fine. However, if you are going to put that cream cheese on a bagel, it may end up to have a different texture than you're anticipating. Sometimes dairy that's frozen ends up to be a little grainy, and a lot of people don't like that. So you can freeze dairy, but I would just look at what are you using it for. So on my list here, I share different food items and notes along the side. What other categories do we have? Okay, vegetables, let's talk about that. Broccoli and cauliflower, totally fine. Sweet potatoes, totally fine. Something like a butternut squash works out fine. And one thing I thought was really interesting when I was doing research on this is people say not to freeze celery, that celery will end up to be too watery. Again, what are we using the celery for? I actually freeze onion, celery, and carrot in these small little snack bags like this. Why do I do this? Because I love to make soup, and this is really quick and really helpful for my future self when I go to make soup, because the onions are already cut, celery is already cut, carrots. Now, I don't care if the celery is a little soggy because it's going to soup anyway. Stone fruit, apples, even grapes can be great frozen, but again, you have to look at the intention. What I end up doing with apples and pears is making something like my apple cake, or making a hand pie, or making a galette. So it's an ingredient in something else. I'm not just eating those apples because they are gonna get mushy. Berries, perfect for freezing. Pasta and rice, I don't know. Pasta, and as an Italian, I say no. I say just have extra pasta in your pantry, like every other Italian, right? And make it fresh. It's gonna be so much better. The pasta, the gluten will break down in the freezer and it will get really mushy. Don't even try gluten-free pasta in the freezer. It's just not going to work. A lot of people talk about bread and freezing bread, and actually my grandmother used to freeze bread all the time. Soups, stews, and broths. Okay, these are my favorite things to freeze. Why? Because they're kind of expensive at the grocery store, honestly. Like, let's take a look at 1 quart of vegetable broth, organic vegetable broth. I saw it was anywhere from $2 to $3 a quart. Are you joking? It's so easy to make your own broth. One of the things you can do is use the super cubes. These are the super cubes, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. These are sort of narrow, but I will put a link to some different options below so you can look on Amazon and see which ones are good for you. But what I do is I take my broth or soup. You can freeze them in this, or you can freeze stuff in a jar. Okay, let's take a look at the type of jars that are freezer safe. This is it, okay? This is a quart jar from Ball. I only buy Ball jars, and that's because I've heard so many horror stories of canning using cheap glass from China. So you wanna look for something that's straight up and down. That's freezer safe. See how this one, and this is homemade ketchup I've had in my fridge. You see how this one comes in like this and then goes up? Yeah, that is not freezer safe. So what ends up happening is a lot of times the liquid expands and there's not enough room, and it will break right along this ridge line here. And I will say that sometimes I've heard that these jars do explode in your freezer, so please don't do that. Stick with a jar like this, it's straight up and down. But make sure when you're buying your jars that it says freezer safe, and they're ball jars. Those are my favorites. Again, I'll put a link below and some examples. And that's the basics of freezing. So I have this resource free on my website. I don't even require an email. We want to make the most out of our food budget. How do you do this? You stay on top of the fruits and vegetables that you have. You make the most of it. You do things like, I'm looking at a sad pear on my counter. That's gonna become something, okay? Okay, friends, that's it for me. I hope you got something out of this video. Go ahead and download the freezer guide so that you know which items. Maybe you should get at the store already frozen. Maybe you should, make the most out of it and freeze it yourself. But you have all of my instructions on the one sheet. Go ahead and like and subscribe and share this with a friend who you think needs to know this information. Sending you lots of love today. I will see you in my next video.